back to doing an episode of Talk Story to Me, and we got to watch, actually binge watched, all of Stranger Things 2. So it was a lot of fun, and we're both going to start off with our biases and give a quick summary of what it is we thought of the first season. So I'll let James start since.
All right. So some of my biases are, well, number one, that I'm okay with the story just being average as opposed to having to be groundbreaking, and I can still enjoy the story even if it's not the best thing ever. So, yeah, I grew up watching a lot of movies that some people would consider not good movies, but recognizing that, uh, and also from the first, yeah. So those are part of my biases. I enjoy more of either a story has to really make me think, really make me feel, or have very good characters. And as long as one of those elements is met, then I can enjoy and overlook a lot of the other more glaring problems with it.
Or it can make him laugh.
Exactly.
So, in terms of my biases that are relevant to this particular series, I really do like the idea of serialized storytelling, so it appeals to me on that. I enjoy monster stories and stories that really focus on relationships between characters, so absolutely love that. I do not like ham-fisted culture references, particularly, and I'll get into that more later, but it can really grate on me when it's turned into a period piece of a certain type and it just doesn't quite flow with the story. For the um, first season, I would say I actually didn't think it was as groundbreaking as a lot of other people did. I thought it was fine. It was not bad by any means, but everyone was talking about how unpredictable it was and how groundbreaking it was, and I found it very predictable. I found it enjoyable, but there were only a couple elements that really stood out to me and were just, oh my goodness, I can't believe that happened. And then I was like, oh, but that was good to do. So because of that, one of the things I struggled with was there was so much hype surrounding Stranger Things that it made me feel let down, and I wasn't sure quite what to think of it. So,
All right.
still
And
like
my
the characters, but
All right. My impressions of the first season were there, a lot of parts that I remember, some parts of it don't remember as much. But what I really remember and liked about the first one was sort of getting into the kids themselves. It was very much it seemed like a very fun retelling of a Stephen King novel where you've got the kids focused in this very specifically dated world, encountering the unknown and trying to figure out what's going on. The first season also felt like, with me, I started watching Lost right about the time of the writer's strike, after everyone had built it up, and then the writing started to suffer and started going every which direction with a plot twist for the sake of having a plot twist. And there are a lot of parts in season one of Stranger Things that I felt very much played into those flaws. Unfortunately, there was a lot of mystery, but almost as if each episode was the writers figuring out, okay, we're gonna have a great mystery here. We're not even sure what it is yet. We'll reveal it to you once we figure it out in about an episode or two. So then coming into season two, then I still had those impressions of the first season, even with the wrap up at the very end. Wrapping up some of the events, tying them together, leaving room open, but not completely answering everything, and setting things up for season two. Mm-hmm. So with this review, I'll see how season two tied in with that lasting impression of me, which was a Stephen King miniseries written by the producers of Lost.
so we both enjoyed the first season. Better than average, I would say, for that. And for the second season overall, I really enjoyed it. It's not groundbreaking in any way, in fairness. There's a couple of surprises, but I enjoyed the series generally.
And for season two, I really enjoyed it. The performances were fun. The actors seemed a lot more comfortable in their roles than they had in season one. The storytelling to me seemed a lot tighter. It was every episode knew from a director's standpoint it was this piece of the story, the next episode was going to be the next piece, and everything flowed much smoother, so it was easier to sit back and just enjoy the ride of these characters going through the series of events without them trying, the writers trying to prove, oh, we can be mysterious. It's just telling a good fun story set in a very specific time period that was easy to identify. And even if you blanked out for a second or had to go run to the kitchen to turn off a stove, you can come back and still pick up exactly what's going on.
That did happen. We did have a
Yes.
stove emergency in the
Yes,
middle
we
of
did.
the binge watching. But as far as that goes, one of the things that I found discussed a lot with other people I was watching it or discussing it with is the discussion about pacing. It is a slower start this time through than it was on the first season, but I liked the pacing overall. And I guess maybe I should have listed that in one of my biases. I really don't mind a slow burn. It doesn't have to jump off with action right away. Give me something that I'm interested in, and in this case, it was the characters. It was a little bit odd that it was, we're back to 1 year right before Halloween, and only now are they looking at replacing the girl in their token troop, or whatever you want to call them. Or is it the Losers Club from Stephen King's It? I think I remember.
I think it was, yeah, Losers Club from Stephen King's It, the Monster Club from
Monster Squad.
the Monster Squad, yeah, from the Monster Squad movie.
Anyway, it very much fits in with that. So I was interested in the characters, wanted to find out what was going on with them, and there, of course, is the new character played by Sean Astin, and
Yes.
he did a really good job, and we'll get into that more later. But it is a slow build. However, it does start to pick up pace with one off in episode 7 where you're going, oh, okay, all right, back to the main story. And in general, I did find that it was a nice pace for watching and not boring. At least I didn't find it boring.
Right, it wasn't boring for me either. In fact, I may have to go back and rewatch both seasons and compare, because I felt the second season actually started off quicker and a little more focused than the first season. Even though there wasn't as much action going on, there weren't quite as many people dying or anything like that going on. The evil hadn't emerged as quickly in season 2 as it did in season 1.
But we did have a missing child first thing.
Right, exactly. Right, which is sort
like
of that category of things happening. So even though those things weren't happening, I still felt, again, it was much tighter. The beginning of season 1, remember, we had half of the first episode dedicated to a Dungeons and Dragons adventure, getting to know our children main characters. So there, not a lot's happening either, and so you're getting to know the characters. And so season 2, we already had these characters. We just had brief reintroductions to them, and then jumping into the story, almost picking up where the last one left off. So for me, I didn't feel that it took off necessarily a slow burn. It wasn't an action-packed, in-your-face reintroduction, but I didn't mind that so much because, again, it was refamiliarizing myself with the characters. We have a looming shadow that creates the sense of foreboding and imminence of, okay, there is going to be something here with Will's episodes that he had. And so that was enough for me to get me into the event, into the story, and moving through, even though we didn't have a lot of action or a lot of violence or a lot of scares even in the first couple episodes.
I thought that the young man, I guess he's still a boy.
Yeah.
We'll call him a young man who played Will in particular. He really captured that very frail character. He's not doing so great, which you can probably, if you've seen the previews, there's some bad stuff happening to this poor kid. And I thought that was handled well. The characters themselves, we get introduced to a few new characters. And at first, 2 of the new characters, particularly Max and Billy, they're very clumsy compared to the other characters that we already know in this series. Now, this doesn't mean they're bad. With Max's character in particular, I can see what they're wanting to do, but I think they're setting this up for season 3. Hopefully, I really hope they do this, is tackle the only girl trope. Because you get some hints that, very briefly, that 11 is not too happy. She is none too happy about not being in the group and this new girl that they're very eager to recruit. But my challenge with Max is it's like, okay, so it's been a year. You're just, it feels interesting that it's about a year since it happened, and yet the season is trying to do almost like the best hits from the first season. And it's not that they don't work, but it's sometimes you notice it and you're going, whoa, 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 hold on. I know you could do a little better with this. So and then Billy is fantastic Stephen King bully. um,
Yeah, my first impression of Billy was if you took the character played by John Travolta in Carrie and you replaced him with a young actor the who was the brother of Ryan Gosling and the nephew of Nicolas Cage, and you threw them together into that role, then that's what this Billy character is. And it basically, yeah, and again, a Stephen King bully character.
he's probably one of the flattest characters. Max is pretty flat too, but Billy really falls into. Actually, they both do. I'll hit more of what bothers me with Billy later. However, I do want to clarify that even though I found the character to be one of the weakest, I didn't think he did badly with his performance. He did the best he could with what he had, and it's not a lot, and so he's a one note bully
Right.
who shows up.
But and also to his credit, in the scenes between Billy and Steve, you genuinely believe that Billy was a threat to Steve.
Yes.
So in that point he did his job. That's creating that kind of conflict and so more Maxine's character you could feel
Max.
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 That's right.
I called her Maxine by accident. My apologies.
That's right. Max genuinely felt in fear of Billy, and when you saw Billy, you saw that he earned some of that fear. He did not disappoint like
Yeah.
other characters that we've seen and reviewed in movies recently that I won't name, but
Stephen King can make you afraid of a 14-year-old and older, and Billy is not 14.
Right, he's probably about 17.
17.
Well, I guess 19 if he failed a couple of grades, which he
Possibly.
could have.
So he's got the size factor. I'd be uneasy with him if I didn't have some way to defend myself, and if I was feeling very damselish, I suppose, and get away from me. I will stab you with my knitting needles.
Right.
But anyway, so then the other new character that we get introduced to is Bob the Brain, played by Sean Astin.
Yes.
And okay, I will address this. This season, I found season 1 very predictable. Like I said, I was able to call most things that were going to happen in it. Season 2 is just as predictable, even more so if you've already seen the first season. And so there are certain things you absolutely know are going to happen. And there are certain lines that as soon as you see it, as soon as you see how the camera frames are set up, you're like, no, I know what's going to happen. Stop that. Stop that. Stop that now. And they do it. One of those scenes involves Sean Astin and as Bob. And Bob is, he ended up, of course, stealing a lot of the scenes that he's in. I found him very likable, and it's one of the measures that I'll use. If it's something that I'm predicting, this is what's going to happen. And it makes sense within the context of the story, because for me it has to make sense, for one, and for two, it has to be done well. If I can see it coming and I'm still feeling no, 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 or yes, 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 whichever one it might be, if I'm actually feeling the response that you're supposed to respond to, then I think they've succeeded. And with Bob, for sure, he doesn't get a huge amount of screen time. I love the fact that he gives Will advice, and then we see how his talking about what worked for him when he was a kid and his typical dad-like advice, and then Will tries it out and has a very interesting experience seeing how does this play out when dealing with the underground. And so I thought that was handled well, an interesting contrast.
Yes. Yep.
Remember, no spoilers.
Exactly right. No spoilers. So I just had, just two brief comments on the Bob the Brain character. First of all, it's really refreshing to see the grown-up nerd actually portrayed as someone who gained confidence as he got older, and someone who looked back and basically grew up. Like we see a lot of these tropes where the nerds are the ones who are being picked on, or they're very insecure, or they grow up and they never leave their mom's basement. But seeing someone who grew up as a nerd and grew up to be very charismatic, very warm, a full realized character, that's something we don't see in movies a lot. And I really appreciate the way the character was written.
But
And
still a little dorky.
a little dorky, right?
In
Of course, you're,
fairness,
once you're a little bit nerdy, you're never going to completely
we
outgrow that.
accept
You just
it.
have to accept it, and this character has definitely accepted that fact about himself. As basically, and so that, and even tying in some parts of his growing up childhood to the current events really shows that that sometimes you can't completely run away from your issues, but you can still grow up and overcome those struggles. And that was
Yeah.
a very nice writing touch that I really liked with that character.
Yeah.
The other point about Sean Astin's performance as Bob is I was waiting for either an explicit Lord of the Rings reference or an explicit Goonies reference. And I didn't get as explicit as I was hoping for, but in a way,
Thankfully.
exactly, in a way, I'm kind of glad for that because they treated him as his own character. It wasn't, hey, we got Sean Astin, let's make a joke on this. Let's make it a Lord of the Rings joke or a Goonies joke. And there was one that I kind of had to stretch to get my Goonies reference in.
He was trying through the whole
Yes,
season. It was
there were
actually
about
quite
3 or 4
amazing.
times where it almost worked, but not quite. But there's one part of the scene where once you hear it, you think about it a little bit, and it works for a Goonies reference, but it's very subtle, and which I did appreciate. They kept that part very subtle, and they treated him as a normal character, as a person with a fresh perspective in all of this madness that's going on with this
Yeah.
family. It was a very nice grounding element to kind of keep it a little bit grounded in reality in the midst of the 80s dated time period that it was in, and of course the crazy extraterrestrial in evil that was going on.
Alternate,
Alternate
alternate
dimension, yes. So,
alternate,
yeah, not
the tourniquet.
exactly the things that our 1980s didn't really deal with in reality.
But yeah, that was a good character. I also have to say one of the surprises for me with this particular season, I was really surprised with where they took Steve's arc. I knew they were going to have to do something with him, given what was obviously left unresolved between Nancy and Jonathan. It's very clear, and they kind of take this, as far as Jonathan and Nancy are concerned, exactly where you think they will. And I think that could have probably been handled a little bit better. I do appreciate that they deal with Barb. They make Barb have an impact in the story and with the characters. But Steve, despite what you would expect happening between uh, Nancy and Jonathan, he actually ends up taking on a. Are you okay?
Yeah, so sorry. No, I was looking half towards you, then I saw the cat doing
Okay,
something
it's
funny,
like
and
you're watching
it,
something.
yeah, our cats walking around behind the screen, just being themselves. But you never know when a cat's just being themselves, or if they're going to do something crazy or
It's true.
hard on or nasty on our carpet. So
Anyway,
new carpet, by the way, which is why I'm even worried about it.
getting back to it, I found
Yes.
Steve's arc to be a really good arc.
Speaking of whom,
Oh, there's Milana. I found it to be, it was better than what I was expecting. And it did not go the way I expected it to. And that was really refreshing. Uh, they, they're going to have to deal with it more in season 3, obviously, because this is going to be a big issue. But it was kind of nice to see. And the development between the relationships with the other characters. There were a lot of good relationships throughout, like, Joyce and Bob was a great one. They made a cute
yes,
couple, and
yes.
I don't know. I like couples, from different age groups, so that we don't just see, oh, we've only got young love here. And I think it's very fair to say that Stranger Things is very much about relationships, and particularly in season
Hmm.
2, or just Stranger Things 2, it's looking at all kind friendships, parent-child relationship. I mean, poor Joyce she's fighting hard still. She's got to deal with a new set of problems and has to confront that fear of losing her uh, son again. I mean, it's a nightmare for her, but she keeps fighting, and I love that about her. But I think one of the best relationships I loved seeing develop was the relationship between Hopper and Eleven. There was some good acting in that, and there was a very sweet conversation involving black holes and mistakes, and you just had a lot of really, really good chemistry between the actors. And I'm so excited to see where they go from here, because for a number of these actors, I mean, a lot of them are pretty young, and they're getting started, and they're gonna do so much more. I hope so. I'm really happy for them.
Yep, and for a lot of the story arcs, I really enjoyed watching where they took these characters. I didn't find anything really, or I didn't find too much that was annoying about them. There's just one character arc between two of the characters that it seemed, well, two being influenced by a third, base between Billy, Max, and Lucas. That there were some of the ways that that was handled. I was left like, okay, wait. I know they have about a number of possibilities of what they're trying to imply, but some help in being able to narrow down one of them would be a little bit helpful.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'll let you figure it out. It's pretty obvious once you get there. No spoilers here, but yeah, it was just a little bit problematic in that dynamic. But yeah, everything else, I bought it complete because the character, like I said, the actors were more comfortable in their characters, and so the characters felt more comfortable, less forced, and were really just they were moving through the story, trying to basically care for, look out for each other, and watch out for their town, which was already still under, had some scars left over that still hadn't healed in a year. And so it was just enjoyable to watch the characters go through. The performances were very good, compelling, and I was able to get sucked into the performances so much that I was able to overlook some of the other potential issues that came up in the series.
Now, we have to hit on a few of the negative things, unfortunately.
Yes.
All in all, like I said, the series goes pretty well in terms of its pacing and what it sets up and delivers on. Episode 7 is one of the weakest.
Yes.
Not going to go into a lot of specifics here, but we take a detour into what feels very much, you've seen these characters before many, many times. There's some room to develop the characters if they decide to go with them, but right now they were pretty blandly handled and not really utilized. And the sole purpose of it was to take one character who's pretty important to the plot and remove that character so that there wouldn't be a much needed intervention. It was an incredibly convenient journey of self out into beyond Indiana. So I, on the one hand, do appreciate they want to take risks. If they decide to develop these characters more, it could be good, but they need more development. Right now you've got it was basically set up very much with sort of that 80s, 90s cartoon style where, oh, that one has that kind of hair and has that color hair, and oh, look, accessories. And that's the substance of the character, which is defined by this punk goth look. So that one was probably my least favorite episode, though. I do think that some of the characters who they started there could really be developed into much better characters. They need some TLC. And then, like I said, Billy for me is very problematic, and particularly how they choose to leave off this character. Max, and he do end up having a confrontation, and it is implied that because of how she handles it this one time, everything is fine. She has fixed it all. Now, I have dealt with bullies like Billy. Also, can I just point, his name is Billy the Bully. Anyway, you don't take a bully down like that. He's clearly not afraid of fighting. Some bullies you can scare off by standing up to them, and other bullies, you stand up to them, they punch you hard.
They make you pay.
They do, and so you have to fight more than once. And so she's definitely not safe, and yet it kind of suggests that, yes, now she's done it. I'm like, no, good first step, but why don't we call the police? Maybe 911 might be helpful. Maybe I don't know. Anyway, it's a they could retcon it and fix it potentially because there were some issues that I had with the first season that they fixed in this season where they just kind of oh, let's fix this.
In the words of one of their own characters, mistakes were made. The people who made those mistakes are no longer here.
Mistakes always happen. It's yeah, and again, it is very predictable. And again, I think it's more so if you've already seen that first season, so you kind of know what the author's tricks are. You know what they've got up their sleeves. You're like, now hold on a second. This surprised me first time around. Hopefully, there was at least one or two things, and a few things were just so on the nose. Particularly like the mimicking of they didn't use the Christmas lights again. No, they came up with another method, and you just see that, and so that's something of a weakness, and yet it's still enjoyable. It's still pleasant enough to watch. I actually think it's fine to watch with kids. I mean, there's a little bit of swearing, nothing too much, and there's an implied sex scene, and other than that, and then you got some nasty deaths by the demagogues. No, demodogs.
Right, yes.
Right. Demagogues, very different movie, friends.
There be no demagoguing here.
That's right. Anyway, we get a little bit more from Lucas in this one, but he doesn't get much of an arc. He needs a little bit more attention. I have to admit, sometimes the kids do some things that are very stupid, similar to, they did some very stupid things in the first season too. But oh my goodness, they remind me of kids that I've worked with, that I grew up with, that I played with. But oh, that brings me to the nostalgia factor.
Yes.
Okay. I'm really getting tired of nostalgia heavy stories, and here's why. They don't actually capture what it's like for that time. What they do is they go back, like, what is popular now that came out of that time? See, for instance, and you saw this in the It movie as well. There were other movies that came out in 1989, but they only mentioned Batman and
Terminator, I believe. Or was it
No.
Jurassic Park?
No, I think it was Elm Street, Nightmare on Elm Street 5 or something like that. Anyway, point being,
Oh, yeah, you're right.
they only mentioned two ones that are very popular now. In culture, every year, and particularly now, but even back in the 80s, there was so much that was being created. Some of the stuff that was popular, we don't want to remember at all.
Fortunately, we have online critics who do the remembering for us.
Yes. And so, in the last one, it was very much Star Wars. It's Star Wars, and of course they keep the Dungeons and Dragons, and I think the Dungeons and Dragons is fine. But then they do a real heavy Ghostbusters, and it's just like, and they have these really, really nice, I mean, like, look like Ghostbuster costumes. And in the last one, they had all of these models and toys of Star Wars and stuff. And so sometimes I just feel like nostalgia, nostalgia, nostalgia. Not to mention the music choices, which sometimes are just like bonk on the nose. They're very aggressive with that. And so my issue with it is that it's like looking back through a filter at what that time period is, and it doesn't really capture that time. It just takes, oh, this was the best thing that we remember from them. And I would much rather see, if you're going to do a period piece, or a place that's supposed to be an homage to a time, go in there and look at what was popular at that time. Don't just go with the top hits. Because sure, the top hits might be what we still remember, but some of them don't go through, and there's other gems that you can find. So yeah, the nostalgia is, they hit it, and I wanted to hit back a few times. Like, I get it. You are from the 80s. Oh, so.
Yeah, some of the negative things that stuck out to me were, well, first of all, even the perceived poverty that a lot of these movies tend to create. That you can tell that these people who create this idea of poverty and lower class, they do it in a very ideal world where this is what people in the upper middle and upper classes think that being poor is.
Yeah, I grew up poor. It's not like that.
I mean, you look at some of the homes that are supposed to be in the poor neighborhood, and they look very well kept up. The floors are always clean.
Yeah, what
There
you're
are,
saying.
I'm saying that there are a lot of truly impoverished neighborhoods, regardless of where you go in the country, where you have homes that are the floors haven't been picked up in 3 days, the carpet hasn't been vacuumed, cars are parked weird places. It's obvious that somebody left a project unfinished and life moved on without them.
Well, now, in fairness, I will point out that Joyce and Jonathan and Will's home does feel more appropriate to that, with what they're dealing with.
True, that one is the
And I think
closest to
he
being
was,
true,
yeah, he
but
was had the biggest struggle with that.
right,
Sorry,
but and
continue.
and even still, the Ghostbusters costumes,
Yes.
created by or worn by supposedly kids whose parents didn't have a huge amount of money. They were going back and forth between school, were trying to save the world, trying to keep their secrets, and just being average eighth graders. And somehow they managed to put together these almost perfectly fitted, perfect replicas of the Ghostbuster
With
costumes.
The working ghost trap.
Yes, with a working ghost trap and polished, put together proton packs.
It looked better than the
Yes.
new Ghostbusters movie.
Yeah, you definitely argue that. And they're a lot better than your average self-motivated eighth grader would put together completely on their own with leftovers of their own of their parents' allowance. Most of the time you're getting basically like a khaki shirt, khaki jeans, two different colors, mind you, and like an old like leaf blower backpack or a regular school backpack that had obviously been duct taped together with a tube of something and an old like vacuum cleaner hose. Obviously very mismatched. This looks very put together, very polished, and it does distract a bit from the supposed lower economic class that they try throughout the rest of the series to make sure that they reinstill with the lock neighborhood.
I thought of something.
Yes.
It's commercialized nostalgia.
Yes, that'd be a good way to put it.
Yeah,
It's like, hey, we have these shiny products. We remember it being very shiny and professional because we want to be able to then resell the nostalgia. And oh, by the way, if you have because this stuff looked good here, we're going to sell you the professional stuff because we don't want to sell you the stuff that you can actually make on your own.
Yeah, the 80s in particular, it was really fun. We got into a conversation with James and I were born in the later 80s, so we didn't actually really grow up in the 80s, and he was in Germany. So
Yeah, our earliest memories are when the 80s were dying out.
yeah, and well, no, you were in Germany and I was in a woods, so neither of us really experienced
True, but I was
80s
still
culture. Okay.
back in time for the for Bill Clinton's election, and I still remember that time period.
Yes, but Bill Clinton's, never mind. Anyway, point.
That was 1992.
Okay. Point being, the point is, so for us, this isn't really triggering a lot of nostalgia because we didn't really experience that.
It's okay.
I'm sorry. And I've forgotten the rest of my point. But yeah, long story.
Commercialized nostalgia, if that helps.
No, it doesn't, but thank you
okay.
so much. I appreciate it.
No problem.
So, long story short, to me that does weaken it, and it felt like some of the plot points were put in specifically to make that happen. You do have the issue of certain things happening, and it's just very convenient to the plot, and it's like, well, thank goodness that happened. And in every story, you're going to have some.
Right.
Quite frankly, you have to have some convenience.
Right. Because if a story is not convenient, you're going to end up with a lot of dead ends, and you're going to lose interest very quickly.
I think
it's going to go on and on and on. You're like, oh my goodness, really? Will somebody just create something to fix the situation?
Yeah. So, just go in knowing that, and I think if you can accept that this is predictable, that this is very heavy on the nostalgia, and that certain times it's going to be compromised to allow for the nostalgia goggles, and that it's not this is not groundbreaking. So don't go in with that attitude. Just go in, and it's fun. I can't wait to see where the characters go, and I have hopes for them. And all in all, it was familiar but enjoyable. I will be looking forward to season 3. Oh, one other thing I would add for the binging. So we planned on binging this, and we binge watched the whole season in an evening, and it's very conducive to that. I was noticing that it's like there it felt smooth for that sort of an experience, and there were some dips and flows that were perfect for me to be able to go in and finish cooking dinner, and getting caught up with James and dealing with the stove incident and handling the cats and all of that. So I can't wait to see what they do with this, because as far as Netflix series go, I do think it's safe to say that Stranger Things is one of their best series.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
So yeah, I do recommend it.
Yeah. I say, yeah, same here. It's great for putting in, for adding to Halloween favorites, since it is themed around Halloween, has a lot of the Halloween themes.
And it's not really that scary at all.
Right, exactly.
I mean,
it's not scary, but it embodies sort of that time of year, the culture that was sort of built up around Halloween more recently, where it's about, this is like, it's one night time of the year where we are truly open to the possibilities of the supernatural and things beyond our world, and and then of course being thankful those things don't actually happen, and then celebrating the end of the year.
Yeah.
But basically, yeah, it's a good one to put in. Like I say, binging through, the entire series and after like on a Friday night or all day Saturday, it's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
You can easily go in, grab snacks, do other things in between episodes. It's really a lot of fun, and there's just enough there to nitpick so you can talk about it, and it's also enjoyable if you want to just turn your mind off and just watch the characters perform. It's not going to leave you feeling completely empty.
To quote Frasier, what's the best thing? What's the second best? No, what is the
what is better than a
a
completely perfect performance? An almost perfect performance with one flaw that we can pick at the entire night.
Yes, but it was a dinner. In this
Yes.
case, we're talking about a performance.
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, those were our thoughts. What did you guys think? Have you gotten to see it yet? And if so, did you enjoy it? And are you looking forward to season 3? So, we'll see you later.
All right, see you next time.